So we're going to basically start at the earliest days when people were just moving to the area. It would be the middle 1700s. This is just a shot of probably what they saw when they came. Many of you will know, and the whole coast of Maine was settled from the coast, and then moved inland later. And Sullivan, Sorrento, Hancock County was no different. I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you're interested and are not familiar with some of the details of how this settlement progressed, there is a book that was just published this year. Charles Joy, who has roots here and spent summers here all his life, and has been a regular contributor to our historical society, and especially the Gouldsboro Historical Society, because he did a lot of research over there. He compiled 10 of his lectures or presentations from Gouldsboro into a book that the Gouldsboro Historical Society is selling to make some money for the society. I'm pretty sure they're available at the Five and Dime in Winter Harbor, and probably by contacting the Gouldsboro Historical Society through their website. We're looking at basically initial settlers were subsistence living. They were hunting, fishing, getting the bounties of the sea, farming, and many of these occupations ended up moving into more commercial fishing. Some of the earliest, here's a couple of shots from the A.W. Gordon collection. This is a gentleman, and I believe it's at the mouth of Flanders Stream on Flanders Bay, and he would be spearing tomcod because there's ice on the water, and the tomcod are heading upstream to I assume they're headed upstream to spawn. And we had an inquiry short time ago. Somebody contacted Raina when she put this photo on our Facebook page, and they wanted to know what the end of that thing looked like. And one of our friends and has done programs for the Historic Society, Brett Ciccatelli, who was a biologist with the Downey Salmon Federation, had a book that showed all these different implements, and most of them around here were handmade. There were every quarry had a blacksmith, and every village had at least one blacksmith, and a lot of this stuff was homemade, but these are the various implements they were using to catch and capture fish. This is just a day's catch for a couple of local gentlemen. Again, it's a much later time. The gentleman on the left is Ed Beaver Martin. I got the photograph from Frank Dedman, who was a local selectman and a very active member of our community, and he's donated a lot of stuff to the Historical Society. This again was from his collection, and I'm sure Beaver's probably in that photo someplace. This was probably in the 30s or 40s, and 9 gentlemen, 9 deer, and those are pretty good sized deer. So, and every once in a while we still see one that size around. All I have. And here's a representation sort of what I mentioned about subsistence harvesting going to a more commercial harvesting. This is Flanders Bay. If you're in the middle of the photo, kind of the left, there's an open spot there. That's what's now the campground. These smelt shacks were producing smelts to eat, to save, but the quantities were great enough. And when we had the transportation available, these folks were catching smelts in the quantities that they were able to pack them up in ice in boxes and take them up over the hill up Tunk Lake Road and put them on a train at the Tunk Lake Station, which is where today, where you would cross the Sunrise Trail out on Tunk Lake, on the Tunk Road. The earliest industry or businesses were wood-based spars to ship back to England, mills. Mills sprouted up all over the place. Most every little stream around here, you can somewhere find what's left of a rock dam that housed a mill. The first mill that we've been able to actually identify was in 1776. Daniel Sullivan and Josiah Bean built a mill, and Jeannie, my wife, is pretty sure it was up on Morenci Stream. But we're still working. This is a mill that was, this particular location is what would be now Route 1 and Flanders Stream, where it runs down from Flanders Pond into Flanders Bay. The bay is very close here. This is on the right-hand side where you can see some brush stuff. That's actually part of the estuary that's tidal. That mill was very active. It sawed lumber to be shipped. That was the beginning and Charles's book really goes into that in a lot of detail. We were shipping lumber back to England. We'd already been fishing fish back to England, and it was pretty prevalent that mills were part of that. I want to go back to the fishing for a minute, just because I remembered something that I should have said 2 slides ago. One of the things that were harvested in the spring were alewives, which are river herring that were going upstream to spawn, and they were netted and captured in pretty good numbers. Matter of fact, it was a pretty going business at the time, and to this day it is. But we found a number of years ago when we were working with with our local alewife harvest that in the, I think it's the 1833 town meeting, the town raised $100 to hire a local gentleman to keep the stream open in the spring and the fall so that the alewives could make it up to the Flanders Pond and reproduce. They go up in the spring, then late spring, early summer, the adults head back to sea, and the youngsters go back in September, October, November. So another indication of subsistence harvesting turning into commercial harvesting. And the town still manages a commercial harvest. The town puts it out to bid, and local gentleman has a harvest up on Flanders Stream. The mill theme, I know at least one of you, because Rich Cunningham has joined us, knows what this is. This is the mouth of, excuse me, Long Cove, feeding out into Sullivan Harbor. And that strip across there was built by Daniel Sullivan and some other gentlemen who were very, very early settlers. And if you look where the darker area is toward the top, and there's another, there were openings there, and there were mills setting on the, and there were tide mills. We had a gentleman from Southern Maine who operates an organization called the Tide Mill Institute up several years ago. It's a concept that I'd never heard of. As it turns out, there were many, many tide mills all over the coast of Maine, and certainly down in our region. I know of a spot down in Stew Bend that was that they identified as a tide mill, and I think there were a couple in Hancock. But it's kind of interesting. I did some research on the Tide Mill Institute website, and there are very few mills, none of which are operational, but this is one down in Matthews County, Virginia, that has been preserved. Before we move on to, I think the granite industry is next. This is one of our local folks, Albert Gordon, plowing this field with his team of horses. Another one of the A.W. Gordon files. We are now going to be moving into the granite industry. I don't know how that's showing up on your screen, but there's a whole, but this is a USGS map, and there's a considerable little ponds all through the map. And this is from a presentation that Steve Perrin put together several years ago, and showed it at our place and other locations. And each of these is identifying one of the various, one of the sites of a quarry. And you'll see that a lot of regular names: Bragdon, Fernal, Gordon, Dunbar Brothers, Crabtree and Havey, Hooper and Havey, Abbott, Alonzo Abbott. I'm pretty sure that Alonzo Abbott is up where, and the Porcupine are up where the Buells settled, and Obadiah is now running his operation, the Granite Gap. So granite was probably the most lucrative industrial type business that we've had in our history. And we have such a wealth of information about that. Anybody who's really interested in it, we can really provide a lot of information. And Mr. Gordon spent a certain amount of time in quarries, because I have a really pretty good collection of photos. And now I need to go back to my script. The first quarry in West Sullivan was opened by James Sullivan. He built a dam on a stream going into Frenchman's Bay. That was very early. Then William Mosley, in the really like about the 1830s, quarried some stone and hauled it up to St. Andrews, New Brunswick, where they built a goal, which is British for jail. I have visited that. It is now a provincial archive building and historical site. And if you drove up to it, it looks a whole lot like the stone store that's sitting along Route 1 in Sullivan Harbor. But our granite eventually proved out to be not the best for building buildings. If you see it, it's got a lot of dark specks on it, and it ended up being very useful for curbing and pavers. We tend to call these pavers cobblestones, but the correct term is paver. And this is Benvenuto Quarry. This is Robertson's Quarry. Benvenuto is up over Track Road, which leads up to a number of quarries from around where Gordon's Wharf is at the beginning of Taunton Bay. Benvenuto, that's Benvenuto. This is Robertson's, and I believe this is one of the quarries up at the end of Quarry Road. The Robertsons owned a lot of land there. They had a store there. The Robertson Lane goes in off Taunton Drive just before the Quarry Road, and their home is back there off the road. And the store was there. Now, many of these operations, almost every quarry had a blacksmith on site, because they made all their own tools. They made everything they needed to do the work of getting the stone out. And so I said we didn't build a lot of buildings. Some of our stone went to some, but the majority of stone that left here left in the way of pavers. And this is a crew taking they would be brought in stones of a certain size, then they would work them down into these. Somewhere I've read how much they got per stone. It was like piecework, and 15 cents a piece sounds, but I won't swear to that. And there were 2 or 3 popular sizes, and we have records that show we probably paved every major city between here and Washington, D.C. And that led to not only getting the stone out and shipping the stone, but mercantile and shipping, because a lot of the quarry owners teamed up with other quarry owners and with other business people to build the ships that they were shipping it out, and so they kind of were in business together with many parts of the business of getting the stone out, getting it ready to sell, shipping it. And this picture should have been before now, but this is a gallimander, and a very interesting invention. It was made to move stone around. Instead of trying to lift the stone up into the bed of a wagon, this thing was designed so that just to the left of the gentleman on the right, just to his right, our left, you could back this or drive this right over a big piece of granite. The chains were hooked onto it. This isn't the best picture, but the looking over the back, that large back wheel is like a boom back there, and that boom actually is hooked to a really big spring, which was the mechanical advantage to lift the stone up. Franklin Historical Society has a wonderful example of these in a little park that they have on Route 182 between Franklin Village and Tideway. So if you're over in that neighborhood, you can visit it. It came out of one of the quarries, but I can't remember which one. This is my favorite shot, one of the first that I found with the granite industry. This is Gordon's Wharf, and you can see Hancock in the other side. Some of those buildings on the other side are still there. But you also notice during this time, and it would have been around 1900, late 1880s, 90s, there weren't many trees around. in any number. They were cutting the wood for firewood. They were farming the ground. I've been told that a lot of wood was shipped down to Rockland to run the lime quarries. Now, like I said, this is Gordon's Wharf. We've got several pictures of Gordon's Wharf at various stages. This is a later one because you can see now that some of the earlier ones didn't have the nice square blocks up and down the side like you can see right at the bottom right hand side. I don't want to guess how many pavers are out there, but there's a lot. This is a waybill for being shipped from Hooper and Havey to New Jersey. I can't remember. I can't quite read that. And this is this gives you an idea of the economics. There are 40,500 pavers in that order. And that may have been close to what was on the wharf, which comes to 525 tons. The bill of sale says that they were getting $1.10 a ton to haul. This is what the shipping company was getting, $1.10 a ton to ship them, and then they were costing them $28.20 to tow the ship back down through the falls and back out to sea. I think in the early days, it must have been really cute trying to sail a schooner up through the falls, and several things were done to mitigate that. And eventually, after the development of pony engines and smaller vessels able to have a motor in them. One of the things that was done to mitigate the falls somewhere around 1900, Army Corps of Engineers blasted a bunch of the ledge out of the narrows coming up through by Tidal Falls, and to make it a little easier to pass. I do want to mention one thing here that I forgot when we had the slide up at Gordon's Wharf. Gordon's Wharf is now owned by the town. It's also a site on the Scudic Scenic Byway, and if you haven't noticed it or had a chance to, the byway site is actually a presentation of the granite industry. It's just on the right, just below the house that's now rented out to the Friends of Taunton Bay for their education center. It's kind of a neat little display. It tells you it shows a lot of the what granite was used for, making curbing, shows the implements and the tools. Obadiah Buell and his brother Gibron put that display together. My grandson loved it when they went the first time. There's a steam drill that they've got epoxied into the granite. I call it like now I'm having a blank. Excalibur, the sword that was pulled from the stone or the whatever. Every kid that goes down there tries to haul it out. It hasn't come out yet. So this is the yeah. This is the it's a tugboat. I've got it on my thing. The Eaton, I have these brain cramps every once in a while. Phillips Eaton, the Phillips Eaton, and here's a shot of Phillips Eaton hauling a three-masted schooner right up where that blast was a little bit ago, a couple of slides ago. And if you look in the background, you can see a wharf sticking out. That is at what is now Edgewater Cabins, that's been in the Dunbar family for many, many years. And hauling the schooner up somewhere up. Now, a point of interest, Gordon's Wharf is where it is now. And I don't know all the details. I wish I knew more, but the track road is right across. And when they built that wharf, it was set up in such a way that track road is a very straight road because there was a railroad. There was a wooden track railroad that had type situation, and they had cars, small cars that were loaded with granite, and gravity would bring them down over the hill, and oxen would haul the empty car back up. It was kind of a neat way to get the product down to the wharf. But there were probably, I think, 6 wharfs right when you went, if you paddled your canoe up from Gordon's Wharf and headed upstream. Everywhere there was a little point sticking out of the from the shore with a granite outcropping or whatever. Those folks were building wharfs, most of them near to a quarry and shipping granite and other stuff. And a lot of these operations were big enough, large enough, so a lot like coal mines. And this was the Hooper and Havey Company store. So the workers worked in the quarries. They may have lived in housing that was provided by the quarry owners, and they probably bought most of what they bought from the company store, had it taken out of their pay. Just to show you kind of where this is, it's no longer there where it was. The little house with the mansard roof just to the left is the Gordon house that belonged to A.W., his father, his grandfather, and was in the family for a long time. That house still exists up there. And if you see the mansard type at the top of the store, and if we had a little better shot at it in the home back there, they like to put a stripe in whatever they were using, cedar shakes or whatever. We're going to see it again in another slide in a little bit. So pretty self-contained operations in some cases. And this is a really neat picture that we acquired a while back. That's Sullivan Harbor. Just the stone store is just off to the left. That little island is still out there, but at the time this picture was taken, I've got another version of it that hasn't been digitized yet. There is a building out there. There were wharfs on both sides of this little part of the Sullivan Harbor, and there was a sailmaker that was making sails for the sailing ships out on that little island. And it was fun. Now we're kind of moving into transportation. What was it like getting around here in those times? For the most part, there was not a bridge between Hancock and Sullivan. There was one built in like about 1870, I think, or 80, that lasted a few years. Then the ice took it out. They tried to get it rebuilt, and it never did. So when that bridge wasn't in there until they built the Singing Bridge in the 30s, the way you got across the river was on the Sullivan Hancock Ferry. This is one of the earlier models. There were various ways these were set up and operational. They were rowed across, or one version, I believe they had a cable across so that when it was the tide was ripping one way or the other, they could at least not have to aim way upstream to make it across or downstream as whatever the tide was doing. But this is one of the earlier versions, horse full of lumber, you can see. And then here's a later one with, you can date it by the Model T Fords in it. And the fact that that little boat behind it is a motorized boat that is pushing the ferry back and forth across. And again, that's looking from Sullivan over to Hancock. Yes. And the trains were coming into Hancock then. So people were arriving, and by now, this period of time, our harbor was a pretty going place. And one of the best ways to get there was to take the train to Hancock, take the ferry across. There were ferries that did run from Hancock Point, but there were also ferries that ran from Sullivan. And this is, we're back to Edgewater Cabins. I showed you the wharf in an earlier photo. And this is the ferry landing at Edgewater Cabins. In the background is the big hotel, the Waukegan House, that was built as part of a development. And I'll talk more about that in a minute and show you a better picture. Just as kind of a personal note for my family, this, I believe that the major house is off to the left, and it may even be before that. We've got another shot coming up. That ticket booth, once the ferries were done and the bridges were built, the Dunbar family moved that up over the hill, and it's the basis of one of the cabins that's still there. My wife and I and our two children rented that cabin 1 week a year for almost 19 years before we ended up finding a piece of land and eventually building and moving here. So it's the history around here is really fascinating. And this is one of the ferries. This is the Sapo. Ferries ran from Sullivan across the bay. They ran in between Sullivan, Sorrento, Hancock. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention back at the beginning, Sullivan, Sorrento, Hancock were all one town when at the earliest settlement. And then at various times, Hancock was the first to leave, and then Sorrento left just before 1900. I forget dates. Here's that same wharf and ticket booth from a little different direction. And these are both A.W. Gordon pictures with the ferry boat coming in to land and take on its, and they also ship goods as well as passengers. And that was about the time we started a new era all over the state. And it's when I call it the rusticator planned community era. And that's this particular building was the cottage summer home for Frank Jones. Frank Jones was the gentleman who purchased most of Sorrento, and his design was to sell lots to people to come in and have a kind of a scaled down version of what Bar Harbor had become with landowners from, I mean, with folks from the city wanting to get out to what we have and cooler climates and I believe they're called rusticators, but the rusticators were a little earlier. They came to Maine and stayed in large hotels. My mother grew up in Rangeley. I spent a lot of time in Rangeley as a kid, and um, there's still one or two of the old hotels where whole families would move to the and live in the hotel, bring their staff, and spend the summer. And Dad may take the train back to the city and work some, but they came and spent the summer. That led to, well, gee, maybe we ought to buy a piece of land, and have a house. And so this is the Sorrento Hotel. That was the big house in the background. I think it's a private home, but the front part's a hotel. They had a tennis court. They had a bowling alley. Had a lot of the amenities that people like to have. This is the Sorrento Library. It's still there. It's still functional as a library. And Frank Jones's wife donated that to the town of Sorrento. This is the Waukegan house from a little closer view. You can see the stripe I talked about. My timekeeper just joined me. So I think I'm going to speed up a little bit through the rest of these. But there's the stripe I was talking about. This photo, I'm told, if you look at the gentlemen, it's all seems to be gentlemen, and they're all wearing some kind of a stripe thing on the in it, and I'm told it was probably a some kind of a civic organization like Mason or that kind of a thing. I'm just going to skip through the mining part. This is a map that if you could really see it, and we have copies at the museum. I have copies in JPEG. There are a number of mines, but the mining boom was pretty much a bust. It didn't really do well. But along the river, there's Phillips Eaton again. So this is on the Taunton River. There's a road off Taunton Drive that's called Mine Road, and it leads down to this point. I believe the building in the front was a rooming house. Off to the right would be, there was a mine shaft underneath that, and the big building off to the left was the smelter building where they actually did smelt some ore. I'm just going to go through some kind of neat pictures, just showing what life was like. These photographs, this is a Gordon photograph. These photographs, many of them had very little information about what they were, who owned them, or whatever. So we've spent many the years that I've been here trying to figure out where they are and maybe who owned them. And last week we're doing another project where we're doing some old house classes where people have owned old houses. We've got a fellow named Les Fossil, and it's going to be a neat program where it's actually a class and you learn how to do the things necessary to restore your house. But anyway, one of the guys is Norm Bamford, and he wanted to. He's got a house in North Sullivan that he's restoring. So we sat down and started going through these pictures. He says, "There's my house." And so now we know who owned the house back then. And this is one of the few houses where we actually have interior shots. And we didn't even know if these interior shots matched the house. Norm confirmed it, they do. And beyond that, he knows, he's done the research, so he knows who owned the house at different times. And we're probably going to be able to at least tentatively identify, and if we can find some other family photos of that family, identify who these folks are. I like this picture because of, and I've actually done this. If you see the little box the guy in the white shirt's holding, that's an early Brownie camera. And so these two people are taking pictures of each other, the front of the boat and the back of the boat. And I've done that with friends at social gatherings in the past. These are just kind of living photographs. These are folks, these kids getting ready to go sleds. I love those sleds. I can remember actually seeing those sleds when I was a kid that friends of mine had down in Rangeley. Church of the Redeemer. We've got some really nice photos of that. We've got one that actually is showed the bell tower to the left under construction and the men working on it. And this is the old swimming hole. It's called the Sorrento Pool. And it's in one of the little coves on the West Side Road. I don't believe any of these amenities are here, but through the 20s, 30s, 40s, after the houses in Sorrento, more people were living here. That was the place to hang out all summer long.